Howdy, Phil.
Howdy, Keith.
Cafe CLIL number 9.
What have you got? What have you got there in your
I
mug?
thought I'd change it today. I've got the Chinese horoscope cup. No idea where that came from.
Mine's far more exotic. This is my Cleethorpes mug. This is the little town on the east coast of England where I was brought up. It's in my house.
Wonderful,
It's very
wonderful.
faded, but there you go.
So we're gonna talk about learner language for CLIL today, and to start with, it's worth sort of defining a little bit, I think, what we're talking about. And in our book, we did sort of give one of these nice bullet lists of 7 principles to follow. So I'm going to list those, and I'll stick the visual in afterwards, and then I'll give a bit of a definition of how I see language as well, and we'll take it from there. So we've got number 1, mediate language between the learner and new knowledge. Yeah. 2, develop subject language awareness. 3, plan with language in mind. 4, carry out a curriculum language audit. 5, make general academic language explicit. 6, create initial talk time for students. And 7, sequence activities from private through to public for students. So we may pick on those, Phil, any of them or all of them. But to go back to what language we're talking about, we also split learner language into 3 layers, if you like, of language. We talked about subject-specific language, the kind of language you can't do without in any subject area. We talked about general academic language, so more kind of cross-curricular language, which is less visible than subject-specific language. And then there's this we call peripheral language in the books. It's this language of the classroom, language of the chat and the organization of the interactions in the classroom. And that's where we took language in our chapter on language for CLIL, for learners. But you also talk about the complexity factor of language. Would you say a few words about that, Phil?
Yeah, the complexity factor. Well, you tend to find that the complexity factor will increase when you move into low frequency language, as we call it, or academic language. Now we've said this before, no? But I guess if you're a language teacher listening to this, then you'd need to know exactly what that means. And I suppose you could, I'll just pick a word out of the air. You talked about general academic language. So a word like photosynthesis is obviously not a general academic language. It's connected to biology. A word like hypotenuse is obviously very specific to mathematics. But if you take a word like thus, students panic.
Yes.
It's a little word, isn't it? It's a little word. It's 1 syllable. It's 4 letters, and it's 3 phonemes. No? Yeah, there you go. 3 phonemes, and it causes all sorts of problems. But it is a general academic word, and it's very low frequency. You wouldn't use it on Friday night in the pub, or someone would think you were very strange. So if you look at a word like thus, a language teacher would cope with that by saying, okay, thus, what is it? It's a modifier, no? It's a modifier, and thus modifies or deals with 2 propositions, a proposition that's come before and a proposition that is coming afterwards, no? Because of X, thus Y. Well, not only is that syntactically difficult for a non-native student, learner, they have to learn where it goes in the syntactic position of a sentence or a clause. It's also tricky, perhaps in a conceptual sense, because you're dealing with automatically dealing with 2 propositions, something that's come before and something that's come afterwards. It's almost like cause and effect or something. So once you start to analyze a word like thus, the grammatical description of thus is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. The student has to be able to use it. And so
you're absolutely right.
When you come on to Swain and you come on to all those people who've talked about what they call comprehensible output, how many times are you going to use thus in your life? Probably not a lot, but at some time you probably will if you want to be a professional. So there you go.
Yeah, and you mentioned a diagram for visualizing this. Is it worth mentioning that we can pop it in later when we do the edit?
Oh yes, I'd love to. We've made a habit on this podcast, because of usually having a quadrant of some sort. We like quadrants on this. Today is the International Day of Quadrants. Well, it's not actually. Actually, today is the International Day of Human Rights, but I don't know. We'll work that in somehow. but worth mentioning. Yeah, it's Mariani's quadrant, 1997, and I do like it. I think again, John Clegg was the first person who showed me it, and yeah, we can put it up later. But again, it's got what you've got is the vertical and the horizontal. I've got it here because I'm hopeless with spatial things. I've got Mariani's quadrant ready, and yeah, so the vertical line of the quadrant is about the challenge. So it's high challenge or low challenge in a
Yeah,
classroom.
yeah.
And the horizontal is the support horizontal. So high support, low support.
Okay.
Aha. So when you're talking about student language, that seems to be crucial. Of course, Mariani doesn't mean language exclusively, but he or she meant that obviously it comes into the equation, which we've been
Yeah,
banging on
yeah,
about this all the time.
yeah,
Of course it
yeah,
does. So let's just take the Northwest. We all start with the Northwest. Now that's where we kind of want to be. It's high challenge, high support. Okay,
yeah,
that particular quadrant of the major quadrant.
yeah,
Um, that's where we want students to be. We want them to be challenged conceptually and linguistically possibly, but we also need to give them high support. So the high support will be mainly linguistic, I guess, but it's also conceptual. They go together, of course, we've said
yeah,
that.
yeah,
That's where
yeah.
I want to be. And just if we just move to the southeast, which is the best kind of spatial contrast, we've got low support and low challenge. Okay, so that's what Mariani calls the boredom zone. So the high challenge, the boredom zone. I like that. That is very true, isn't it? You know, you can imagine a student sitting there thinking, well, there's nothing really to think about here. You know, I know this. So why is the teacher, why is the teacher doing this kind of thing? You know,
Yeah,
there's no
yeah,
support.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
no
yeah,
support, but there doesn't need to be. Look,
yeah,
and I like the northeastern one, um, where you've got. Well, I don't like it, but it's called the frustration zone. So you
okay.
can imagine frustration zone is high challenge, conceptually speaking. We're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
E equals mc squared and Einstein's relativity theory, but we've got low support. So it's
yeah,
probably low language support, which means there's low conceptual support. They both go together again. No? So that's
yeah,
called
yeah.
the frustration zone. And I'll just finish it off. I don't want to monopolize it, Keith, but we've just
No,
got the
no.
southwestern zone, which is called the comfort zone, which is high support, low challenge. That's interesting. High
Okay.
support, low challenge. So again, the strong students kind of going, um, yeah, okay, it's all right. I'm happy here. Comfort zone. There's lots of support, but actually I don't need it, mate.
Yeah, yeah,
And there's not much challenge. So
yeah.
it's quite interesting. In the south, we've got comfort zone and boredom zone. One's
Okay.
okay. We like to be comfortable, but maybe we're not getting very far, no?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
in those two northern quadrants, we've
yeah,
got learning engagement zone, and we've got the frustration anxiety zone as well. So
yeah. Sure, sure.
what we're trying to do is we're trying to get northwest, basically. Sorry, we're
Yeah,
not north
yeah,
north. We're
yeah.
trying to get
In
northwest.
in a way, your reference to John is interesting because I wanted to mention John Clegg as well because he motivated me to research language in curriculum subject areas because he wrote a document when we were working together very early called The Language for Thinking, and it basically lays out things teachers say, things learners say for different curriculum function areas like um, categorizing things. How many types of X can you name? There are 3 types of X, A, B, and C. You know, that kind of thing. He just simply wrote it all out in a long 11, 12 page document. And I thought, what a useful thing to do. And ever since then, I've been collecting things like this is from the 1980s. This is an educational support department in Hounslow have written a language for history for bilingual teachers. So this is an EAL, an English is an additional language support resource. And I found another one in my library as well I wanted to share. This is language and science. The same, it's a photocopy. I just wrote to these people and said, I've heard about your work, can you send me a copy? And a few weeks later I got them in the post. But it's not rocket science, is it? It's things that teachers and trainers and curriculum designers have been doing for a very long time, but it is niche. And I think that's where our challenge is for CLIL. It's kind of breaking this niche corner we've been put into to make the focus on language for learners as widespread as we possibly can by, just talking about how important it is to bear in mind the complexity framework and bear in mind how you can plot language and scaffold it into activities for learners. That was one of the reasons why I was excited to write this, another publication for Macmillan, the Vocabulary Practice Series for science, and we did one for geography. And I think, one of the challenges is that it's about habit forming for teachers to be constantly looking and fishing for crucial language to help their students perform in their tasks. I often use an example that shows how challenging that can be for learners, even native speaker learners, by a parachute jump task that's in mathematics. It's actually a test item for GCSE maths, O-level maths. And it has person X jumping out of a plane. And after a few seconds, the parachute opens. They're fast falling initially, but after the parachute opens, they're dropping slowly to earth. And then the task has 4 different graphs plotting height and time and very different shapes. And in the test item, Phil, the students have to, first of all, pick which graph they think is correct and then describe why the other 3 are wrong. And the language demand of what looks like a very simple part A is easy. You don't have to write anything apart from the letter of the graph you think is right. But describing why the other graphs are wrong, unless they've had lots and lots of practice, and they have lots of academic language, specific language and general academic language, it's going to be really challenging to them.
I've seen the parachute jump. It's Ahmed, isn't it? Is it Ahmed who jumps?
It is Ahmed who jumps out. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen it, and it's very good. And I'm sorry, just interrupting you there, but again, we get banging on about these cognitive discourse functions. It sounds so scary, isn't it? But if you look at Ahmed's jump, it's a perfect example, as you're saying, of the 2 functions of 1, describe, 2, explain. You can't get away from the explanation of why it's going to take longer, but you also do have to get the kids to describe, no?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, so really the practicality of that question is, what can teachers do about making that easy? What language can teachers give? Well, first of all, shaping graphs. Learners need to know how to describe movement in a graph and associate it with the real life situation of a parachute jump. Yeah. So they would be describing possibly verbs with adverbs, falling quickly, for example.
Okay.
Nouns with adjectives, a gradual descent.
Yes.
For example. So in a way, that knowing that, the teacher then is equipped either to do something very simple with their slides on the screen, make that phrasing very visible while they're talking through another graph. Some wonderful resources that have learners playing with these academic phrases to sort them into up movement, downward movement, leveling movement. I'll pin that in the video as well, because those things then take us into the realm of task, don't they, and activity design. But I think it's the awareness of language that is very, very important. I mean, with the parachute jump example, my sister has a PhD in mathematics, and I did quite well in maths at school, but I wanted an expert native speaker to talk through that task for me. And so it was in the days of Skype. I was on Skype with my sister recording the call. She had the task and she talked through it exactly as the exam test item demanded. Pick the right one and describe why the other 3 are wrong. And I recorded the whole thing, transcribed the whole thing, and then looked at subject-specific terminology, general academic language, and there was lots of peripheral language as well, because we were chatting as she was doing it. I have to say she got it wrong, Phil. She called me back the next day. It's B. But that wasn't important. What was important was auditing the subject-specific language and the general academic language, and then thinking about how you might provide that to learners when they're put in that position of having to answer the question themselves. And I think that's what CLIL is all about, isn't it? It's that auditing, that scouring of curriculum subjects, textbooks for teachers, their own minds while they're planning, and then lifting it out and putting it into activities for students.
And making it explicit, absolutely. I think that we've all had these road to Damascus moments, haven't we, in our careers? And one of my road to Damascus moments was in Bilbao. It's great, isn't it? I had my Damascus in Bilbao, where John Clegg had come along. I didn't know him at the time, and he'd come along to talk. It was back in the late 90s, and I thought, I'll go along and listen to this chap, because I've heard all sorts. Well, sorry, I tell a lie. We had met briefly in Lancaster.
Okay.
The first CLIL thing I ever went to in 96, 97, when I didn't even know it was called CLIL. And he'd come along and been very nice about one of my posters. Anyway, he's talking in Bilbao, and he said this really simple thing. He said, I'm not going to talk particularly about language teaching today. He said, how many of you ask your students to define things, and people put their hands up. And then he said, and how often have you seen the word, define this, define that in a summative test? And lots of people put their hands up. And he said, how many people here have actually taught students how to define? And he wasn't being horrible, because he never was, but because no one put their hands up. And it was a Damascus moment, because he was actually saying, he wasn't talking about cognitive discourse functions, but he was saying, we expect native speakers, particularly, we always expect native speakers in exams to say, define this, define that, but we never give them the language to do it. And it's just really simple. So I've got this new simple little game I always play with teachers when I'm training, I have this warmer. It's really simple. I use for language teachers and for subject teachers, particularly subject teachers. And I just put, to warm up the thing in the morning at 9 o'clock, I just put these objects on the screen. And I get someone to sit with their back to the screen, the old victim game. No, that the person with their back to the screen has to guess what the object is. Okay. So I put something up like a syringe, but before I do it, I say to them, you can only explain. Sorry, I'll use the word again. So you can only define this with this certain language framework. And I say, all these things are nouns, okay? It's when you define a noun, it's different from when you define a verb. If you define a noun, you always say, it's a thing that, so I usually use a table. I say, it's a thing with a horizontal surface that is used for ing. So they have to do that. So they can only use that framework. And of course they can, they're teachers. So they go, so the syringe will say, it's a thing that is used for injecting things into your body to help you with that. And they might give a compliment to that sentence there, but they have to use the frame. And it's great. So it's just a really simple activity. It's fun. They laugh. They've got to try and get the word. It's a syringe. But I insist on that. And then, of course, you say, hey, if you're defining a verb, it's not the same, is it? How do you define a verb? And they go, they'll say, it's to jump. It's when your 2 feet leave the floor simultaneously or something. But it's when. So that simple thing that John Clegg said, he said, do we teach our students to define? No, we don't. How do we define? Well, we use language frameworks, and exactly what you're talking about. You can audit that, or you can make that explicit in any kind of activity, and that's what good CLIL teachers do. It's what good CLIL teachers do. It's what good teachers do. Sorry, I'll rephrase that.
I think also the time we're living in now. I mean, when I wrote the vocabulary stuff for Macmillan, we didn't have AI. We had concordancing software, which would allow the user to input documents, usually text format documents. And the concordancing software will look for things that you tell it to look for. So you could put in a root part of a word, such as hypothesis. You might type in hypothesis and then get it to search through science textbooks for every time that root form appears in sentences. And then you could have a look at all of that and decide, what structures are useful for learners to be able to make their own and use in the language of their subjects. And that's the basis of these vocabulary books. But today, We've got AI. You can actually prompt your assistant, okay, I'm going to give you this document, and I want you to lift out every single sentence from capital letter to full stop where this phrase is used. And it will do it like that. No longer do you have to trawl through all of this stuff using this very old software, concordancy. And I think, you know, maybe there's a role for AI in teacher preparation for fishing for language. You know, they then have to decide how much of it they want to use. Yeah. But actually the auditing is very easy to do these days, I think. And I wanted to mention another document because I'm always aware that it's very good if we can offer links and books and, you know, resources for colleagues. I've been working on a document for a long time now, which I call the language audit, and it's basically whenever I come across another curriculum discourse function like a hypothesis, I collect language. And it's all alphabetized now, this document. It's about 50, 60 pages long. And I take things from lots of other places. It's based on the work of Avril Coxhead, who did a similar master's work. I believe it was a master's diploma that she was writing called the Academic Word List. If you Google that, you'll find the Academic Word List, Avril Coxhead. And what she wanted to do was provide academic phrases for students in tertiary education for whom the medium of instruction was a second or foreign language. And it took off. It's a brilliant resource used all over the world for medicine, economics, whatever they're studying in university education. We've never had anything like that for secondary or primary, you know, or even preschool when it's done through a foreign language. So I decided to do that. And my invitation to our listeners, viewers, is if you'd like a copy, I don't publish it anywhere public, but I will send, if you send me an email, and I'll put our emails in the notes as well. Yeah. So I think in a way, we've got two things, haven't we? We've got where can teachers find this language? And it's in the curriculum guidelines, in the functions. It's in their textbooks, but largely you've got to look for it unless you've got glossaries at the back or nice language boxes, which are quite rare in textbooks. And it's in the teachers' heads as well. And what they need to do is some time to trawl all of that content input to take the language and then make decisions about how to give it to learners to prepare their output content.
That's the key, Keith. It's how they make it salient, you know. Yeah. And well, again, I use an example from I was in Serbia last week. Okay. I was in Serbia at the weekend. It's on a Sunday morning talking about learning situations. It's only teachers who do that. In the hotel that we were, actually, there were a lot of insurance reps as well, and they'd had their party on Saturday night. On Sunday they went home. The only people left were teachers, you know, which is great. It's fantastic that they were prepared to do all this stuff on a Sunday morning, you know. But what I'd done, because I wandered around the city, I'd wandered around the city on my own for certain points and just tried to look at the language. And as Thenoth and Sonny Thenoth talks about the Dirk Gorter as well, they talk about the linguistic landscapes. So again, what you're talking about is an easy way. You know, I just as a quick example, I was looking at learning situations for language teachers. All the teachers were language teachers from all over the Balkans. Okay. And they were great, you know. And I just wandered about, and of course there's a lot of Cyrillic script. I don't understand it, but lots in English as well. But I saw the chemist. I saw the green cross for the chemist, and it was, you can guess, it was called an apotheker. All right. So, because I know where that's from. It's from Greek and Latin. It's from Greek, I suppose, apothecary. You know? And then further along, I saw a shop in the commercial centre, an optician's, and it was called an optica. So I know this isn't anything too clever, but of course, when I was talking to teachers a bit later about academic language, because language teachers aren't really used to using it, and even in situations, I said, well, look, you know, if you want a learning situation, no, it's a perfect learning situation. You know, just get Serbian. You're in Serbia. I said, imagine just getting Serbian kids. I said, right, let's go out for a little walk around the commercial centre. Just stay with me, and we're going to write down as many words as we can think of in Serbian that we could teach, that we could tell English students of our age about. You know,
Yeah.
these words are Serbian that you will understand. Let's find the words that those English kids will understand. You know, they'll understand optica probably. You know, they'll understand apotheca. Well, they might not get that, but apothecary. But
Another one is
I just thought about that. You know, it's just a simple way of taking complex, potentially complex language and
yeah.
creating a situation that the kids it could be made visible to the kids through which
Yeah,
it
yeah,
could be
yeah.
made visible.
I think you're onto something there. It's in the environment of the classroom, you know, where we've got the dynamics of the tasks that the teachers prepared. What we're asking teachers to do is really to it's maybe think about language while planning, isn't it? That's what we're thinking about. We want teachers to bear in mind what they're going to demand of their students while they're planning their lessons. And then it may be in the margin of notes, just write down a few crucial phrases that the students are going to be expected to reproduce in their productive part of the lesson. Mentioning Serbia, I wanted to mention another resource that I've written. I visited the International School of Belgrade to do some CLIL work there. They had lots of new arrivals with very, very low levels of English, largely Chinese and Russians. And they wanted some CLIL insight to see how CLIL may be able to help them deal with these very diverse language demands in a lesson. And I was very privileged. I got to visit lots of lessons, observe, make notes. I transcribed as much as I could. They gave me their lesson plans, and the publication I'm gonna put into our clip is that collection of resources I wrote based on what I saw and what I felt the needs were for those learners immediately in the classroom. I mean, unfortunately, what tended to happen was that they would use immediate translation applications, you know, so there was very little happening to develop their English language because it was all going through some application that would turn it into Chinese or turn it into Russian.
Yeah.
And I'll put that publication there because there's all sorts in there. There's maths, there's sport, there's a whole range of subjects at different levels of language as well. And I think that's going to be useful for colleagues to be able to browse and see, you know, so what are we talking about when we say audit language? What does it look like in a lesson plan?
Yeah.
And John's also written a nice document that's called Asking Questions While Planning Lessons. And I'll pin that in the video, where he's got a kind of table that represents a typical lesson plan from beginning to end. And then steps along the way, questions for the teacher about the activities in each of the steps, and then there ourselves for things the students may need to say. And I think that's quite a nice prompt for teachers when they're making notes in planning. Yeah. There's a question mark in my head. Do teachers plan much these days, or go in and they know so much they can just go in without planning? Of course, if you've got learners with language needs in your lessons, you have to take a step back and take another look at the plans that you've got fixed and ready to go in your head.
Yeah. Well, how long we got, Keith? We're doing okay, are we?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes.
Okay. Now, we could maybe next time also talk about, you know, Swain's idea of stretched language as well. I love what John does, but there's also that aspect of how a teacher gets a student to produce language by getting out of the IRF problem, the initiate, respond, and feedback thing about, you know, what's the capital of initiate? What's the capital of France? Student says Paris, and the teacher says very good. You know? But of course, and they've declaratively speaking, they've answered the question, but their language has not been stretched, and so there's a lot of theory that talks about, you know, how teachers questioning can also stretch language. Stretch language, as Meryl Swain talked about. That's another thing we could talk about, because
I think we could really populate a 30-minute session with lots of very practical ideas. You know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of things in my head, and I wanted to mention. Sorry to interrupt you. I realise we're we're going to be strict about our 30 minutes, viewers, listeners, because we've kind of pushed over in the last few weeks. But two more publications all about this are Heidi Hayes Jacobs, which is a US publication, Active Literacy Across the Curriculum. She talks about intelligent curriculum design, which brings together academic language from different subjects so that learners are going through a cycle of language use in their learning moments. And the other one is a UK publication called Helping Bilingual Pupils to Access the Curriculum by Jerry Smith. And she also looks at, you know, when you get to the test moment, the big crucial question is, well, have they been taught the language they need to go through that test? So she talks about populating curriculum planning with language that will eventually be demanded when students are examined. Two very good publications.
Well, just to add to that, and we'll put it up at the end because I can never come up with the name spontaneously. But you mentioned EAL work in Britain. Well, some of the EAL work in Britain is exceptionally good, exceptionally good. We've been criticising the English curriculum every time, but
Yeah.
that stuff is brilliant. And of course, you know, if you're a CLIL teacher or a CLIL person like we are, then you think this is CLIL. You know, well, it is. You know, some of the methodological and linguistic resources in the EAL site, whose name will not come to me at the moment, but you'll put it up at the end,
Sure.
is exceptionally good. And again, for anybody teaching subject literacy or is concerned with that, then they need to look at it. There's all sorts of stuff on there that you can just download and use straight away. It's really good.
Yeah. I think we'll add any links to the notes, and I'll put some visual in the video when we close our discussion. The last thing I wanted to mention is a bigger question, just to hammer the work on the CDFs, the cognitive discourse functions again. And Heidi Hayes Jacobs talks about, you know, curriculum mapping, and I think the obsessive compulsive side of me loves that idea. You know, you've got a huge poster of the whole curriculum, and you can actually see where cause effect is happening, where hypothesis is happening, and of course the language is going to be similar. And if it's mapped on the big picture scale, that's our 30 minutes. If it's mapped on the big picture scale throughout the school, then of course it's going to be intelligent, and of course the learners are going to benefit hugely from when they go to their maths, from their maths to their geography, from their geography to the science, if the language is connected in an intelligent way.
Yeah. And particularly going back to where we started with the word thus, you know, particularly the general academic language that goes right across those subjects. You know, it's just going to make school life easier for them. You know, both in the L1 and the L2. You know, absolutely.